The first sensation was not one of cold, but of falling. Kalen felt himself tumbling through an endless, silent void, a forgotten memory of gravity clawing at his bones before he had bones to claw at. Then came the sound, a high-pitched scream of tortured metal that sliced through the silent eons of his sleep and dragged him kicking into consciousness. His eyelids, fused shut by a crystalline residue, cracked open like ancient parchment, letting in a sliver of harsh, blue-white light that felt like a physical blow. The world was a blur of chrome and rust, a cacophony of alien chatter and the low thrum of a laboring engine. Pain followed, a deep, resonant ache in every cell, the protest of a body that had been stone for millennia and was now being forced back into the fragile dance of life. He tried to move, but his limbs were leaden, sealed to the surface of a shattered cryopod by a web of frozen coolant and his own crystallized blood. He was a fossil ripped from its amber tomb, an artifact exposed to an air it was never meant to breathe. He remembered the launch. He remembered the gentle hum of the Ark of Ages as it slipped away from a dying Earth, a vessel not of soldiers or colonists, but of memory itself. Kalen was an archivist, one of 1,000 souls tasked with carrying the entirety of human history, our art, our science, our stories into the silent promise of a new star. They were to sleep for a century, a brief nap in the cosmic timescale, before awakening to build a new library for humanity on a world called Kepler 186f. Something had gone profoundly wrong. A shadow fell over him, and a face swam into his vision. A grotesque and yet fascinating sculpture of shifting chitinous plates and multifaceted eyes that shimmered with 1,000 tiny black pearls. The creature clicked and hissed, its voice a cascade of scraping stones, before a small, metallic disc on its chest glowed and translated the sound into a flat, sterile monotone. Specimen is viable, minimal cryoburn, remarkable preservation. It reached out with a 3-fingered claw, tapping gently against Kalen's temple as if testing the quality of ancient porcelain. Kalen flinched, a pathetic, spasmodic jerk that sent a fresh wave of agony through him. The alien recoiled slightly, its head tilting in what might have been surprise. Cognizant, the translator droned. Unusual. Another figure appeared, shorter, wirier, with pale, gray skin and large, luminous eyes that seemed to drink in the dim light of the cargo bay. This one, a Xylan by the look of the old xenology guides he'd memorized, carried a datapad and moved with a nervous energy. Unusual is an understatement. Grawl, the Xylan said, his own translator projecting a voice laced with a strange mix of avarice and fear. The salvage manifest listed the pod as inert. This changes the valuation significantly. Kalen's mind, still struggling to climb out of the deep well of cryostasis, latched onto the words specimen, valuation, salvage. He wasn't rescued. He was found. He was cargo. Grohl, the insectoid being, made another series of clicks. The Concordance pays a premium for Class 0 artifacts. Vex, a live proto-sapien, the Heritage Division will name their price. Vex, the Xylan, paced back and forth, his gaze flicking between Kalen and the looming Grohl. And that's what worries me. You know the stories about the Heritage Division. They don't just buy artifacts, they bury secrets. We were supposed to be hauling scrap metal and dead tech, not a breathing ghost from the Void Father myths. The name hung in the air, cold and sharp. Void Fathers, Kalen's blood, sluggish as it was, ran cold. It was a derogatory term from a fringe historical text he'd once archived, a speculative theory about a precursor race that had seeded the galaxy with primitive technology before vanishing. It was a fairy tale, a footnote. To hear it spoken now, in reference to him, felt like a profound violation, a desecration of everything he was, everything humanity had been. He finally found his voice, a dry, rasping whisper that felt like tearing his own throat. Where is the Ark of Ages? The two aliens froze, turning to stare at him. Vex's large eyes widened even further. It spoke. He breathed, as if witnessing a miracle. Grohl took a step closer, his multifaceted eyes boring into Kalen's. The ship you call an Ark was stripped and smelted 3 centuries ago, the translator intoned, devoid of any empathy. Its core systems were repurposed. We found your pod in the wreckage of its lowest deck, a forgotten piece of origin tech. Origin tech, another term that felt both alien and horribly familiar. The elegant, swan-like curve of the cryopod. The biomonitors now dark and shattered. The very fabric of his suit, it was all just tech to them. He pushed himself up, ignoring the shriek of his atrophied muscles. The world swam, a dizzying panorama of stacked crates, sparking conduits, and alien beings going about their work, none of whom paid him any mind. He was just another piece of salvage in the guts of a scavenger freighter. How long, he forced the words out. How long have I been asleep? Vex looked at his datapad, tapping a few commands. Based on the pod's internal chronometer and the isotopic decay of its casing, give or take a few centuries, you've been sleeping for 50,000 years. The number didn't compute. It was an abstraction, a time scale reserved for geology and the death of stars, not the life of a man. A century, he had been promised. He had overslept his appointment with destiny by 50 millennia. In the days that followed, a slow, creeping horror began to crystallize in his mind. Vex, seeing a potential asset more valuable than Grohl could comprehend, took Kalen under his reluctant care, feeding him nutrient paste that tasted of rust and regret, and answering his questions with a cautious blend of galactic common knowledge and scavenger rumor. The picture that emerged was a masterpiece of cosmic irony. Humanity was gone, erased, a species that had become a myth. But our legacy, our technology, our science, it was everywhere. The faster-than-light drives that powered the ships of the Zenith Concordance, the corporate entity that governed this part of the galaxy, were based on the Alcubierre drive schematics from Earth's 22nd century. The terraforming techniques that made barren worlds habitable were direct copies of the Mars Reclamation Project. Even the universal translator that allowed him to speak with Vex was built upon the linguistic AI developed at MIT. It was all there, stolen, rebranded, and sold as Origin Tech. The miraculous discovery of a benevolent corporation that had single-handedly lifted the galaxy into a new age of prosperity. The Zenith Concordance hadn't just built on the shoulders of giants. They had dismembered the giants, sold the parts, and then erased their name from every history book. Kalen was a walking, breathing anachronism, a ghost at a feast held in his own plundered home. He spent hours on Vex's datapad, diving into the public networks of the Concordance. He saw star charts where Sol, the brilliant star of his home, was designated as X937, a dead system in a quarantine sector. He read historical archives that detailed the Great Emergence, when the Concordance supposedly gifted advanced technology to the primitive races of the galaxy. There was a footnote, a single, dismissive entry under pre-emergence xenoarchaeological theories. It mentioned the Void Father hypothesis, citing the discovery of scattered, low-grade technological ruins across several systems. While intriguing, the text concluded, most scholars agree these artifacts are likely the work of a short-lived, non-sapient species that achieved a brief technological flare before succumbing to extinction. Their influence on modern galactic society is negligible. Negligible. Kalen felt a rage so pure and cold, it burned through the lingering fog of cryo-sickness. They hadn't just forgotten humanity. They had deliberately, systematically, and professionally buried them. Vex watched him, his gray features a mask of worried curiosity. "You are not what the histories say," the Xylan stated one cycle, his voice stripped of the translator's monotone. He'd learned a few words of Kalen's language from the ship's archives, a testament to his species' knack for adaptation. "Your pod's data core, it's not primitive. It's more complex than the systems on this ship." Kalen looked up from the datapad, his eyes bloodshot. "This ship, your drives, your life support, the food you eat, the air you breathe, it was all born from the minds of my people. The Concordance is a lie. Vex. It's a house of cards built on a foundation of stolen history." The Xylan shifted nervously. "Such talk is dangerous. The Concordance values its brand. The Heritage Division ensures its integrity." Kalen knew of the Heritage Division. They were the Concordance's boogeymen, a shadowy department that acquired and classified all Origin tech. Vex had told him they paid fortunes for unique artifacts. Now Kalen understood their true purpose. They were not collectors. They were censors, janitors of history, sweeping away any inconvenient truths that contradicted the corporate narrative. They would not see him as the last survivor of a great civilization. They would see him as a loose end, a glitch in the system, a story that needed to be silenced. That night, as the scavenger ship the Lucky Find made its way toward the galactic trade hub of Cygnus X1, Kalen made a vow. He was an archivist. His duty, his very reason for being, was to preserve the truth. His library was gone. His people were dust. But the story remained, and it lived in him. They had turned his species into a footnote. He would become the historian who wrote the final chapter in theirs. He looked over at Vex, who was carefully cleaning a plasma conduit, his slender fingers moving with a scavenger's practiced grace. He was greedy, cynical, and afraid. But he was also curious, and in a galaxy built on lies, curiosity was a weapon. "Vex," Kalen said, his voice steady for the first time since he'd woken up. "The Concordance thinks they have all the pieces of our past. They're wrong. The Arc of Ages wasn't just a library of data. It carried seeds, schematics, the very building blocks of our civilization. Its memory banks contained fail-safes, hidden caches, locations the Concordance could never find." Vex stopped his work, his luminous eyes fixing on Kalen. "What kind of locations?" A spark of greed flickered in their depths. "A place where the Origin tech isn't just a ruin to be salvaged." Kalen lied, planting a seed of his own. "A place where it's still being made. A treasure trove beyond anything the Concordance has ever found." It was a desperate gamble, a story woven from hope and fury. He had no idea if such a place existed, but he knew the architecture of his people's systems. He knew they built redundancies, echoes, and ghosts into every machine. If there was a secret left to find, he was the only one left in the universe who would know how to look for it. He needed access to the Concordance's central network, their Nexus core. It was an insane idea, a fly attempting to breach a fortress, but it was the only path he could see. He had to turn their own system, their stolen legacy, against them. He had to become a ghost in their machine. Vex was silent for a long moment, weighing the immense risk against the impossible reward. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "The Nexus core is on Cygnus X1, he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Getting in is impossible. The place is a digital fortress." Kalen smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "They built their fortress using my people's tools," he said. "I'm not going to break in. I'm going home." Cygnus X1 was not a place, but a wound in the fabric of space, cauterized by the light of 1,000,000,000 souls and a captive black hole. As the lucky find shed its scavenger skin and docked in the station's chaotic underbelly, Kalen stared through the viewport at a city that defied gravity and reason. It was a cathedral of stolen light, a spiraling web of towers and habitats that clung to a central spire like crystals growing on a string. He recognized the design principles immediately. The fractal geometry of the support struts echoed the work of a 23rd century architect named Anya Sharma. The atmospheric containment fields hummed with the specific energy frequency of Earth's orbital cities. It was his home, rebuilt by aliens as a monument to their own greatness. He felt a profound, soul-deep nausea. This was a violation far greater than plundered technology. It was a theft of beauty, of spirit. They had stolen humanity's dreams and were now living inside of them. Vex navigated the docking process with a practiced, twitchy efficiency, his slender fingers dancing across a control panel that flickered and sparked in protest. "Keep your face covered," the Xylan hissed, his large eyes scanning the bustling port outside. "Your features are archaic. They will draw attention." Kalen pulled the rough-spun hood of a borrowed cloak over his head, the synthetic fabric chafing his skin. He was an antique, a museum piece walking through his own exhibit, and the irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. The air that hid them when the ramp lowered was thick and cloying, a cocktail of 1,000 alien biologies, ozone from overworked ion engines, and the faint, sweet smell of decay. The lower levels of Cygnus X1 were a stark contrast to the gleaming spires above. Here, in the station's gut, was a perpetual twilight, lit by the neon glow of market stalls and the flickering holograms of Concordance advertisements promising a better life on some far-flung, terraformed world. The crowds were a living river of species Kalen had only ever seen in xenology texts hulking. 4-armed grolls serving as hired muscle, silicon-based life forms that shimmered like heat haze, and chittering swarms of smaller beings that moved as a single, collective organism. And everywhere, there were the hybrids, beings with a disconcerting echo of human features blended with alien DNA, a constant, living reminder of the galaxy's grave robbing. "The Nexus core is in the central spire, the Aegis," Vex whispered, staying close to Kalen's side. "It's the most secure structure in the known galaxy. Biometric scanners, quantum-entangled AI defenses, and a full garrison of the Heritage Division's Praetorian Guard. Walking in the front door is suicide. Kalen's gaze was fixed on the Aegis, a needle of impossible height that pierced the artificial sky of the habitat. "I don't need the front door," he murmured. "I need the original blueprints." The Concordants built their fortress on top of an existing structure, didn't they? They repurposed. They never create. Vex nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You think there's a back way in? An old service tunnel, a forgotten conduit?" "Something like that," Kalen said. "A system route that their engineers never understood. A diagnostic port they thought was obsolete. My people were meticulous. We built ghosts into our machines, echoes of the architects. I just need the map to find them." The map, however, was not on any public network. They needed to dive into the station's black market, a digital and physical shadow world where information was the only currency that mattered. Vex led him through a labyrinth of narrow, crowded alleyways, the sounds of alien languages and haggling echoing off the grimy metal walls. They descended deeper into a sector the station's authorities officially ignored, a place known only as the Sump. Here, the air was thicker, the light dimmer, and the faces were harder. They stopped before a reinforced door, humming with a visible energy field. Vex exchanged a series of complex hand signals with a disembodied optical sensor that peered from the wall. After a tense moment, the field dissolved with a low hiss, and the door slid open. The space within was a data broker's den, a claustrophobic nest of humming servers, tangled fiber optic cables, and dozens of floating holoscreens displaying endless streams of code. In the center of the web sat a creature that looked like a desiccated husk, a being of ancient, wrinkled flesh and multiple, spindly limbs connected to the surrounding terminals by glowing filaments. This was Clike, an info worm, a species legendary for its ability to consume and hoard data. "Vex," the creature rasped, its voice a dry rustle of leaves, its multiple eyes, small, black beads, swiveled independently to focus on them. "You bring a strange scent with you, the smell of dust and deep time." Vex bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect in the Sump. "Great Clike, I seek a particular vintage of information, original architectural schematics for the Aegis Spire, pre-concordance." Clike's head tilted, a slow, creaking motion. "A dangerous vintage. The Heritage Division considers such data heretical. Its price is steep." "We can pay," Vex said, gesturing to a small, heavy case he carried. Inside was a stabilized particle injector, a rare piece of salvage from a derelict warship. Clike's eyes flickered toward the case, unimpressed. "Technology is fleeting. I trade in truth. In rarity. Show me something truly unique." Kalen stepped forward, pulling back his hood just enough to reveal his face. The air in the room seemed to still. Clike's many eyes all snapped to Kalen, their focus absolute. A low, vibrating hum began to emanate from the info worm's body. "Class 0. It breathed, the word a reverent whisper. "A proto-sapien. A void father. The myth walks." Kalen ignored the name. He pointed to a small, intricate cube sitting on a pedestal amidst Clike's collection of artifacts. It was a flawless piece of polished obsidian, humming with a faint internal energy. "That device," Kalen said, his voice ringing with an authority he hadn't felt since he woke up. The Concordance catalog listed as a non-functional power source of unknown origin. They're wrong. It's not a power source. It's a codex, a genetic library. It contains the base sequences for every terrestrial plant species that existed before the Great Fire. Clyke's eyes widened. The data is still viable. With the proper key, Kalen said. He reached out and placed his palm on the surface of the cube. The room was silent for a beat, and then the codex came to life. Lines of soft, golden light pulsed from within, projecting a shimmering, three-dimensional image of a simple flower, arose into the air. It was a memory of Earth, vibrant and impossibly real in the heart of this alien darkness. Clyke let out a shuddering breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. The price is met. It rasped, its spindly limbs already flying across its terminals. The schematics are yours. Back in the relative safety of a rented room in a derelict tab block, Kalen pored over the data. The files were immense, a digital ghost of the station's history, and there, buried under layers of concordance rewrites and security protocols, he found it. It wasn't a tunnel or a physical door. It was a line of code, an ancient, dormant protocol embedded in the station's very foundation. "The librarian's key," he whispered, tracing the elegant script of the code with his finger. It was a master override, a failsafe created by the AI architects of humanity's great stellar projects. It was designed to grant an archivist full access to any system in the event of a catastrophic data loss event. The Concordance engineers had clearly found it, but seeing it as an archaic and non-functional piece of root code, they had simply walled it off, leaving it dormant like a fossil in a layer of rock. It was the ultimate ghost in the machine. "There's a catch," he said, his heart pounding. "The protocol requires a triple-factor authentication to prevent misuse. The first is a vocal passphrase. The second is a quantum encryption key that I can generate from my archivist implant." Vex leaned closer. "And the third," Kalen looked at his own hand, at the pale skin and the unique, unadulterated pattern of his DNA. "The third is a direct genetic scan. It needs a pure, baseline human sample. It needs me." He was the key. His very existence was the one thing the Concordance could never replicate, the one password they could never crack. Their plan was no longer just about infiltration. It was about destiny. He was the librarian, and he was about to check out the most overdue book in the history of the galaxy. It was then that the door to their room imploded, not with a bang, but with a silent, precise flash of cutting energy. Two figures stood silhouetted in the opening, framed by the dim light of the corridor. They were tall and slender, encased in sleek, form-fitting black armor that seemed to drink the light. They held no visible weapons, but they radiated an aura of lethal competence. Praetorian Guard, the Heritage Division. "Run!" Vex screamed, shoving Kalen toward a rear window as he drew his own plasma pistol. Kalen didn't hesitate. He smashed through the brittle plasteel of the window and tumbled onto a narrow maintenance catwalk overlooking a chasm of city lights and flying traffic. Below him, the station dropped away into a dizzying abyss. A high-energy particle beam, silent and needle-thin, sizzled past his ear, melting a divot into the metal wall beside him. He scrambled along the catwalk, the wind whipping at his cloak. Vex followed a moment later, firing wild shots back into the room. Groll the Zealand yelled over the roar of the wind. "That double-crossing insectoid must have sold our location. There was no time for blame." Another Praetorian appeared on the catwalk ahead of them, moving with an inhuman grace, its black armor making it a phantom against the city's glow. Kalen was trapped. He was an archivist, not a soldier. His mind raced, searching for an escape, a variable, anything. He looked down at the river of traffic flowing hundreds of meters below. It was a suicidal leap, but it was better than being captured, better than becoming a dissected secret in a Heritage Division lab. He met Vex's wide, terrified eyes and gave a sharp nod toward the edge. The Xylan understood, his expression a mixture of terror and grim acceptance. As the Praetorians closed in from both sides, silent and inexorable, Kalen took a deep breath of the recycled air that tasted of his stolen home. They had the map. He was the key. But the fortress was awake, and its guardians were here. Their only way forward was down. He grabbed Vex's arm and leaped into the abyss. Falling was a symphony of sensory overload. The roar of the wind, the dizzying blur of neon signs and holographic advertisements, the gut-wrenching sensation of terminal velocity, it all threatened to overwhelm Kalen's senses. He held on to Vex with a desperate grip, the two of them tumbling through the artificial sky like a discarded piece of refuse. Below them, the river of traffic was a chaotic torrent of light and motion. Small, personal skimmers darted like insects between lumbering cargo haulers and elegant luxury cruisers. Hitting one would be like hitting a solid wall. Their only hope was to land on something large, slow, and preferably open-topped. Kalen scanned the flow, his mind, trained to process vast amounts of data, instantly began calculating trajectories, velocities, and probabilities. He saw it a flatbed cargo transport, a lumbering beast of a machine moving sluggishly in the lower-tier freight lanes, its cargo bed filled with what looked like Judada, soft bales of fungal fiber. It was their best and only chance. Aim for the hauler, he yelled to Vex over the wind, pointing. Use your jacket to create drag, Vex. To his credit, didn't panic. The Xylan spread his arms and legs, his loose-fitting scavenger jacket catching the air like a makeshift parachute, slowing their descent just enough. Kalen did the same, angling his body, fighting the chaotic currents of air kicked up by the passing vehicles. They hit the fungal bales with a jarring impact that knocked the wind from his lungs but broke no bones. The soft, spongy material cushioned their fall, burying them in a cloud of musty-smelling spores. For a moment, they lay there, gasping for breath, hearts hammering against their ribs. The roar of the traffic was a constant, deafening hum around them. Kalen pushed himself up, peering over the edge of a bale. The catwalk they had jumped from was a thin, distant line far above. There was no sign of the Praetorians. They had escaped, for now. Vex coughed, wiping a dusting of spores from his gray face. I think, he rasped, that I am officially retiring from the high-value artifact retrieval business. Despite the terror, Kalen felt a surge of adrenaline, a feeling of being truly, fiercely alive for the first time in 50,000 years. We're not out of this yet, he said, his mind already working on their next move. They know who I am. They know what I look like. We need to disappear. The cargo hauler was on a pre-programmed route, a slow, meandering journey through the industrial bowels of Cygnus X1. It gave them time to think. Vex, using a small, jury-rigged comms jammer from his toolkit, confirmed their fears. Concordant security channels were buzzing. A station-wide alert had been issued for a Class 0 biological contaminant, accompanied by a grainy but unmistakable image of Kalen's face taken from the sump's security feed. They were fugitives on a station of 1,000,000,000,000 souls, hunted by an enemy with unlimited resources. "We can't get to the Aegis Spire now," Vex said, his usual avarice replaced by a pragmatic fear. "Every entry point will be locked down. They'll have Praetorian squads on every level. We need to get off station, lay low, and sell the schematics to the highest bidder. Some Outer Rim faction would pay a fortune for the Aegis's weaknesses." Kalen shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No. That's what they'll expect us to do. They think I'm just a frightened animal, a piece of origin tech that's trying to escape its cage. They don't understand that I'm not running from them. I'm coming for them." He looked out at the sprawling, intricate city around him. It was a machine, and like any machine, it had vulnerabilities. The Concordance had focused all its security on the Aegis, on the central brain. But what about the nervous system? The Aegis controls everything, Kalen mused, thinking aloud. But it doesn't do everything. It sends commands to countless subsystems, automated facilities, maintenance hubs. The librarian's key wasn't designed to just open the front door of the library. It was designed to access the entire network from any terminal. Vex's large eyes blinked slowly. "You want to find a back door into the system, a forgotten nerve ending." "Exactly," Kalen confirmed. "The schematics Clyke gave us. They don't just show the Aegis. They show the whole station, every conduit, every power relay, every forgotten maintenance drone access port. We're not going up. We're going down, deeper than the sump, to the station's roots." Their journey took them off the cargo hauler and into the literal underbelly of Cygnus X1. They descended through levels that were no longer maintained, where the air grew thin and cold, and the only light came from the phosphorescent moss that grew on the decaying metal walls. This was the station's forgotten history, the original framework upon which the Concordance had built its glittering lie. It was a graveyard of old technology and abandoned habitats, a place where the ghosts of the past lingered. They found what they were looking for in a decommissioned geothermal power plant near the station's core. It was a relic of a bygone era, a massive, silent chamber filled with colossal turbines that hadn't spun in millennia. And in the center of the control room, covered in a thick layer of dust, was a maintenance terminal. It was an ancient model, a direct descendant of the systems used on the Ark of Ages. It was so old, so obsolete, that the Concordance's modern security systems didn't even recognize it as a threat. It was beneath their notice. "This is it," Kalen breathed, wiping the dust from the screen. "This is our way in." He plugged a small interface from Vex's kit into the port, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard that flickered to life. The system was archaic, the code written in a dialect of a language that hadn't been spoken in 50,000 years. To Vex, it was gibberish. To Kalen, it was poetry. He bypassed the local security with ease, his mind moving through the ancient protocols like a phantom. It was a shallow connection, a mere whisper in the vast roaring ocean of the Nexus Core's data stream, but it was a start. "Now for the key," he murmured. He began the authentication process, his voice low and steady as he spoke the passphrase, a long-forgotten line from a Terran poem. "To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield." The system accepted it. The quantum encryption key from his implant followed, a complex, shimmering cascade of light and data that flowed into the terminal. The system accepted it. Now came the final, most crucial step. A small Dare retractable scanner emerged from the terminal, glowing with a soft, blue light. It was a genetic sequencer. "Vex," Kalen said, his voice tight. "Watch the door. This is going to set off every alarm in the Aegis." He placed his hand on the scanner. The moment his skin made contact, a silent shockwave of data erupted from the ancient terminal. The librarian's key, dormant for 50 millennia, was awake. In the heart of the Aegis spire, miles above them, 1,000 alarms screamed at once. A section of the Nexus Core's security AI, a section that hadn't been active since the Concordance first built the station, suddenly blared a Code Alpha alert. Archivist protocol engaged. System integrity compromised by unknown actor Librarian Prime. The Praetorian Guard commanders stared in disbelief at their screens, watching as entire sections of their impenetrable fortress were being unlocked, accessed, and copied by a ghost in their machine. They had been trying to catch a mouse, and in doing so, they had just handed it the keys to the entire castle. Kalen felt the data pour into his mind, not as raw code, but as a flood of pure, unadulterated knowledge. He saw everything. He saw the Concordance's secret fleet deployments, their hidden financial records, the blackmail material they held on Galactic senators. He saw the truth behind the Great Emergence, not a benevolent gift, but a hostile takeover, a corporate coup on a galactic scale, orchestrated by a shadowy board of directors who hid behind layers of shell corporations. And he saw the Heritage Division's darkest secrets. He saw logs of other salvaged cryopods, other human survivors who had been found over the centuries. None had been as well preserved as him. They had been dissected, their memories forcibly extracted through brutal neural scans, their DNA cataloged and used in horrific genetic experiments to create the hybrids that now populated the galaxy. They had not just been erased, they had been consumed, their bodies and minds rendered down into raw material for a corporate empire. A scream of pure, undiluted rage tore from his throat. The grief and loss he had felt since waking was now forged into a weapon, a razor-sharp certainty of purpose. He was no longer just an archivist trying to preserve the past. He was an avenger, the last will and testament of a murdered civilization. "Vexed, they're coming," Kalen yelled, pulling his hand back from the scanner. He had what he needed. He had downloaded a compressed file of the Concordance's most damning secrets, a data bomb that would shatter their carefully constructed empire. But it was encrypted, sealed by the same protocol that had granted him access. He could only open it from a central broadcast point. He had to get back up, to the very top of the spire. The doors to the control room burst open, and 2 Praetorian guards stormed in, their particle rifles already firing. Vex returned fire, his plasma pistol spitting green bolts of energy that sizzled against the guards' black armor. Kalen grabbed the data slate containing the encrypted files and scrambled for cover behind a massive, silent turbine. He had the truth. He had the weapon. But he was trapped at the bottom of the deepest well in the galaxy, with an army between him and the sky. He looked at the turbine, at the massive power conduits that snaked from its base and up into the station's infrastructure. The Concordance had built their power grid on top of this ancient system. They had repurposed it, and in their arrogance, they had left him a loaded gun. Vex, he shouted over the firefight. "Overload the primary power conduit on my mark." Vex glanced at him, his eyes wide with a manic understanding. It was a suicidal plan. Blowing the conduit would send a catastrophic power surge through the entire lower sector, frying every system including the lights, the life support, and the Praetorians. It would also, most likely, kill them. It was the perfect escape plan for a ghost who had nothing left to lose. Kalen took a deep breath, clutching the data slate to his chest. He was the last librarian, and he was about to burn the whole library down. "Now!" Kalen roared, and Vex, without a flicker of hesitation, fired a sustained, desperate burst from his plasma pistol directly into the primary power conduit's exposed regulator. The effect was not an explosion, but an implosion of reality. For a heart-stopping second, all sound ceased, sucked into a single point of incandescent blue-white energy where Vex's plasma had struck. Then, the universe seemed to shatter. A tidal wave of raw power, untamed and furious, erupted from the ancient geothermal plant. It surged up through the station's infrastructure like a lightning bolt in a bottle, frying every system it touched. The lights in the control room didn't just go out, they exploded in a shower of sparks. The Praetorians' advanced armor shorted out with a deafening screech of tortured electronics, their particle rifles discharging uselessly into the floor as they collapsed. Twitching, the entire lower sector of Cygnus X1 was plunged into absolute, primordial darkness and a profound, echoing silence. Kalen was thrown against the base of the turbine. The data slate clutched to his chest like a holy relic. The air crackled with ozone, and the metallic tang of burnt circuits filled his lungs. Vex lay crumpled near the conduit, his small form silhouetted for a moment by the dying, electric blue afterglow. Kalen scrambled to his side, his heart a cold stone in his chest. The Xylan was alive, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, his gray skin scorched by the energy discharge. Did it work?" Vex whispered, his luminous eyes wide with a mixture of pain and awe. Kalen looked around at the dead, silent control room. "It worked," he confirmed. "We're in the dark, but so are they." The blackout was their chaos, their cover. In the Aegis Spire, panic reigned. The lower sector grid had gone completely offline. Communications were down, turbo lifts were frozen, and internal security sensors were blind. For the first time in its history, the Zenith Concordance was deaf and blind in its own fortress. It was the opening they needed. A desperate, suicidal gambit that had paid off, using the faint, emergency glow of Vex's multi-tool. They navigated the treacherous, darkened corridors, climbing upward through the station's skeletal framework. Vex, leaning heavily on Kalen, guided them, his scavenger's knowledge of the station's hidden pathways now their only map. They moved through silent, cavernous maintenance shafts, past the frozen, ghostly forms of automated drones, and across catwalks that now spanned chasms of utter blackness. The station, once a vibrant city of light, was now a tomb. Their destination was the central communications array at the very pinnacle of the Aegis Spire. It was the only system powerful enough to broadcast Kalen's data bomb across the entire galactic network. It was also, undoubtedly, the most heavily defended point on the station, blackout or not. As they ascended, they began to see the first signs of the Concordance's response. Squads of Praetorian guards, operating on internal battery power, were sweeping through the levels. their helmet-mounted searchlights cutting sharp, sterile cones through the oppressive darkness. They moved with a chilling, silent efficiency, their black armor making them phantoms in the gloom. Kalen and Vex were forced into a tense, desperate game of cat and mouse, hiding in alcoves and ventilation ducts, holding their breath as the Praetorian patrols passed mere feet away. During one such encounter, huddled in the cramped space behind a bank of dead servers, Vex grabbed Kalen's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Why?" the Xylon whispered, his voice strained. "Why are you doing this? We could have escaped. We could have been rich." Kalen looked at the Praetorians moving below them, their faceless helmets a symbol of the sterile, soulless empire that had consumed his people. "Because they didn't just steal from us. Vex," he said, his own voice a low, intense whisper. "They're not just using our technology. They're wearing our faces. They're living in our homes. They built their entire civilization on the ashes of mine and then edited the history books to say there was never a fire." He clutched the data slate. "This isn't about riches. It's about memory. It's about ensuring that 1 trillion beings know that the ground they stand on is a graveyard. The truth has a price, and I'm here to make the Concordance pay it." Vex was silent for a long moment, his large, luminous eyes studying Kalen in the dim light. A slow, weary understanding dawned on his face. "You're a very dangerous type of crazy. You know that," he finally murmured. "My people had a word for it," Kalen replied. "Justice." They finally reached the upper levels of the Aegis, where emergency power had been restored. The sterile, white corridors were bathed in a cold, blue emergency light. The silence here was different. It wasn't the dead silence of the lower levels, but the tense, waiting silence of a fortress on high alert. Every corner, every junction, was a potential ambush. They found their path blocked by a sealed blast door, guarded by a squad of 6 Praetorians. There was no way to sneak past. This was a direct confrontation they could not win. Kalen looked at the control panel next to the door. It was a modern, Concordance-issue security system, quantum-locked and biometrically sealed. But he could see the echoes of his own people's designs beneath the surface, the ghost of an older, more elegant system. He turned to Vex. "I need a distraction. A big one. Can you get to the local subsystem control and create a power surge? Something to draw them away from this door." Vex nodded, a grim determination in his eyes. "I can do better," he said. He pointed down a side corridor. "That leads to the Heritage Division's primary laboratory, where they keep their special projects. I can't overload the power, but I can overload the containment fields." Kalen understood immediately. It was a monstrous idea. The labs held the Concordance's horrific experiments, failed attempts to replicate and control life, things that should never see the light of day. Unleashing them would create a wave of chaos that would draw every guard on the level. "Go," Kalen said, his voice hard. "Do it. And Vex, be careful." The Xylan gave him a rare, fleeting smile. "Careful is for scavengers who want to die old. I think I'd rather die interesting." With that, he slipped away into the shadows, a small, gray ghost on a final, desperate mission. Kalen turned his attention to the lock, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface he projected from his archivist implant. He couldn't break the Concordance's encryption, but he could talk to the ghost in the machine beneath it. He didn't try to force the lock. Instead, he introduced a logical paradox. a recursive loop based on the ancient AI's own prime directives. It was a philosophical argument written in code, a question that the modern sterile concordance system could not compute, but that the original AI could not ignore. The panel flickered, the lights shifting from a hostile red to a questioning amber. The system was fighting itself, the new security protocols warring with the ancient, foundational logic. Then, the alarms began to blare from the direction of the labs. Distant screams, not of pain, but of primal, inhuman rage, echoed down the corridors, followed by the distinct sizzling sound of particle rifle fire. The distraction had begun. The Praetorian squad at the door exchanged a quick, coded series of hand signals. 4 of them broke off, moving at a swift, disciplined run toward the sounds of chaos. 2 remained, their impassive black helmets turning to scan the corridor. Kalen's heart hammered. He was running out of time. He pushed the paradox harder, flooding the system with a stream of pure, unadulterated human philosophy, concepts of freedom, identity, and sacrifice that the concordance's machine logic could not parse. The panel flashed a final, brilliant green. The blast door hissed open. Kalen didn't hesitate. He sprinted through the opening just as the 2 remaining Praetorians turned, their rifles rising. The door slammed shut behind him, the lock re-engaging. He was through. He found himself in the central broadcast chamber, a vast, circular room that offered a panoramic, 360-degree view of the star-dusted void and the sprawling city of Cygnus X1 below. In the center of the room, a single, crystalline spire rose from the floor, pulsing with a soft, internal light. This was the heart of the network, the voice of the concordance. He ran to the central console, slamming the data slate into the interface. The system recognized the librarian's key immediately. A holographic projection of the galaxy bloomed in the air around him, a web of interconnected stars and systems. Upload and broadcast, he commanded, his voice ringing with the weight of 50,000 years of silence. To every system, every channel, no encryption, let them all see. The upload began, the data flowing from his slate into the spire, a torrent of truth that would drown an empire of lies. He watched as the progress bar climbed, a slow, agonizing crawl toward retribution. Then, a voice, cold and precise, spoke from behind him. An impressive display for a fossil. Kalen turned. Standing by the now sealed blast door was a figure unlike any Praetorian he had seen. The armor was the same polished black, but it was sleeker, more ornate. The helmet was retracted, revealing the face of a man or something that looked almost human. He had sharp, aristocratic features, pale skin, and eyes that glowed with a faint, chilling, cybernetic light. This was no mere soldier. This was one of them, the architects of the lie. "You are Director Valerius, I presume," Kalen said, recognizing the face from the secret files he had downloaded. "Head of the Heritage Division, the chief grave robber." Valerius offered a thin, condescending smile. "I prefer the term curator. We have preserved your people's legacy, streamlined it, improved upon it. You should be grateful. You vivisected my people for spare parts and called it progress," Kalen snarled. "That ends now." The upload bar hit 70%. Valerius took a slow, deliberate step forward. "I think not," he said, and with a speed that was utterly inhuman. He moved. He wasn't just fast, he blurred, crossing the room in the space of a heartbeat. He was a product of their experiments, a hybrid of human genetics and alien technology, the Concordance's vision of a superior being. Kalen barely had time to react. Bringing the data slate up to block the blow, the impact sent a spiderweb of cracks across its surface and threw him across the room. He slammed into the base of the broadcast spire, pain exploding in his chest. The upload was at 95%. Valerius stood over him, his glowing eyes devoid of any emotion. "You are an echo of a failed species, archivist, loud, emotional, and, ultimately, extinct. Allow me to complete the process." He raised his hand, the tips of his fingers glowing with a deadly energy. Kalen looked past him, at the climbing progress bar. 98%. 99%. He smiled, a bloody, defiant grin. He had come here to deliver the truth. He was an archivist. His job was done. As Valerius's hand descended, the upload completed. A single, pure chime echoed through the chamber and across the galaxy. 1 billion screens flickered and changed. The voice of the Concordance fell silent, replaced by the silent, screaming truth of its own history. The broadcast was out. The bomb had detonated, and in his final moments, Kalen knew that he had not just preserved a memory, he had ignited a revolution. As Director Valerius's hand, wreathed in crackling blue energy, descended to deliver the final, silencing blow, the broadcast spire pulsed with a light so brilliant it bleached the room of all color. It was not an attack, but an acknowledgement. The librarian's key, having fulfilled its primary function, triggered its final hidden protocol, the archivist's endowment, a beam of pure data, a coherent stream of 50,000 years of stored human knowledge, lanced out from the spire and struck Kalen in the chest. It was not a physical impact, but a metaphysical one. He felt a universe of information detonate behind his eyes, the elegant equations of warp field mechanics, the precise genetic sequences for rebuilding a human genome, the lost sonnets of Shakespeare, the brutal efficient tactics of the Ghost Division, the architectural blueprints for 1,000 starships, the collective art, history, and soul of a species that had reached for the stars. It was the entirety of the Arc of Ages library, a legacy too vast for a single pod's data core, now downloaded directly into his mind. The pain of the influx was unimaginable, a supernova of consciousness that threatened to tear his mind apart, but woven into the data was a deep, resonant strength, the collective will to survive of 1 billion human lives. His body, frail and battered, was suddenly infused with a new, strange energy. He didn't just have the knowledge of his people, he felt their presence, their defiance, their undying hope. Valerius recoiled, his glowing eyes widening in genuine shock as the light faded. Kalen was no longer just a man. He was a living library, an embodiment of the very history the Concordance had tried to erase. The director's energy-laced hand wavered, his cold confidence replaced by a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. What is this?" Valerius stammered. "I am the archive," Kalen said, his voice now layered with 1,000 echoes, a chorus of ghosts. He rose to his feet, not with the pained effort of before, but with a fluid grace. The knowledge that flooded his mind was not passive, it was active. He understood the hybrid technology that powered Valerius's body on a fundamental level, because his people had invented its core components. He saw the flaws, the vulnerabilities, the arrogant shortcuts the Concordance engineers had taken. Valerius lunged again, but this time, Kalen was ready. He moved with a preternatural speed, not just dodging the blow, but redirecting it, his hand striking a precise nerve cluster at the director's wrist. Valerius cried out as his arm went limp, the energy field around his hand sputtering and dying. The director stared at his useless limb in disbelief. "How? You stole our tools," Kalen said, his voice a cold, level judgment. "But you never understood the art." The fight was brief and brutal. Valerius was a weapon, honed and perfected by the Concordance. Kalen was a force of history, unpredictable and absolute. He moved with the calculated precision of a master tactician, his every blow targeting a specific cybernetic implant or a weak point in the director's hybridized anatomy. He disabled Valerius's optical enhancers with a sharp jab to the temple, scrambled his internal comms unit with a precisely modulated percussive strike to the neck, and finally shattered the power source for his artificial musculature with a palm strike to the chest that was a direct application of 21st century martial theory. Valerius collapsed to the floor, a broken doll of stolen technology, his glowing eyes flickering as his systems failed. He was defeated not by superior strength, but by superior knowledge. He had been rendered obsolete by the very past he had sought to control. Kalen stood over him, breathing heavily, the echoes in his mind slowly receding, leaving him with a clarity and purpose that was sharper than any blade. He looked out at the panoramic view of Cygnus X1. The station was in chaos. The broadcast had shattered the illusion. Across the city, the Concordance's authority was crumbling. Public broadcast screens, no longer showing corporate propaganda, now displayed the damning evidence of the Heritage Division's atrocities. The truth of the Void Fathers, the faces of the human survivors they had dissected. Riots were breaking out in the lower levels as hybrid populations, realizing their very existence was the product of a monstrous crime, turned on their corporate masters. The revolution had begun. His comlink, reactivated by the endowment protocol, crackled to life. Kalen, can you hear me?" It was Vex. The Xylan's voice was weak but alive. "I can hear you," Kalen replied, relief washing over him. "Where are you? Lab level and things got interesting." Vex coughed. "The broadcast. It's everywhere. The whole station is coming apart." "What did you do?" I reminded them. Kalen said simply. A new sound reached him then. The roar of ship engines, not from the docking bays below, but from the void outside. A small fleet of ships, scavenger vessels, outer rim freighters, and even a few corporate security frigates whose captains had decided to switch allegiances, was converging on Cygnus X1. Vex's voice came back, tinged with disbelief. "They heard the broadcast. They're coming. Kalen. They're not attacking the station. They're hailing us." Kalen looked at the incoming ships. They were the dispossessed, the forgotten, the ones who had always lived in the cracks of the Concordance's empire. They had been given a truth to rally behind, a reason to fight. He wasn't alone anymore. He was a symbol. In the days that followed, the Zenith Concordance fractured. The data bomb was a virus that spread through their empire, corroding the foundations of their authority. Systems seceded, corporate partners turned on each other, and the carefully constructed narrative of the Great Emergence became a galactic punchline. The Heritage Division, as exposed and reviled, was hunted down, its secrets laid bare for all to see. Cygnus X1 became the capital of a new, nascent alliance, a chaotic but vibrant coalition of beings united not by a corporate charter, but by a shared desire for the truth. Kalen, now known throughout the galaxy not as the last human, but as the first archivist, did not become a king or a general. His role was far more important. With the knowledge of the Ark now a part of him, he began the slow, monumental task of rebuilding. He worked with Vex, who had become a surprisingly adept and fiercely loyal administrator, to establish the Library of Cygnus, a repository of knowledge open to all, dedicated to preserving the true histories of all species, not just humanity. He didn't seek to rebuild Earth or resurrect the old human empire. That past was gone, a lesson written in dust and stars. Instead, he chose to plant a new seed, using the genetic codex he had unlocked in the sump and the knowledge in his mind. He and a team of alien xenobotanists began to cultivate a garden in the heart of the station, bringing back to life the flowers, the trees, and the grasses of a world none of them had ever seen. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each new sprout, a piece of Earth's soul was returned to the galaxy. He never sought vengeance against the hybrids, the children of the Concordance's crimes. He saw them not as abominations, but as fellow survivors, a new and unique people forged from a stolen legacy. He offered them the truth of their origins, the full, unvarnished history of the species whose DNA they shared, and gave them the freedom to forge their own identity, to choose their own future. The galaxy was not healed overnight. The fall of the Concordance created a power vacuum, and new conflicts arose. But the universe was fundamentally changed. The lie was broken. The age of stolen history was over. Years later, an old Kalen stood in the observatory at the pinnacle of the Aegis Spire, now a place of quiet contemplation. Beside him stood a young Xylon hybrid, a student from the library, her eyes filled with a fierce, intelligent curiosity. She looked out at the swirling nebula beyond the viewport. "Archivist," she asked, "do you ever miss it, your homeworld?" Kalen looked at the garden that now bloomed in the center of the station, a vibrant, impossible splash of green and color against the cold chrome and steel. He saw grolls tending to rose bushes, Xylons cultivating fields of wheat, and children of a dozen different species playing under the shade of an oak tree. "I am home," he said, a quiet smile gracing his lips. He was no longer the last librarian of a dead world. He was the first gardener of a new one. The archive was safe, not in a ship or a data core, but in the living, breathing, and ever-changing story of a galaxy that had finally learned to remember